One of the main values I have as a game reviewer is longevity, design that holds up over time. This is why I'm often in disagreement with contemporary reviewers on games or trends coming out now, where I think there's a lot of trends happening in game design now that are getting positive feedback, that are seen as sort of the new way to make games that I think will not hold up over time, that I think they are shallow and short-sighted. And it is my hope in the future that solid, more fundamental game design will reemerge as a standard and something people value very highly. And so even though this is a critical video where I'm talking about current design trends that I don't like, there is an underlying optimism here because I do sincerely believe that strong fundamental design in the end will win. How exactly that happens, how we get to that point, I actually cannot imagine exactly how that will work, but I do believe that is what is going to happen. Over time, these more shallow trends will get replaced with more solid, fundamental design concepts. And I'm not including any monetization stuff in this video, not because I don't think it's a problem, but I think it's a problem people are more aware of and keeping their eyes on. And so instead, I'm talking about actual game design trends. And yes, there is an overlap there, but I have a whole big, massive video with Boghog coming up in the future about monetization in game design that I think you all will really enjoy. But this one is about 10 game design trends that are short-sighted. In no particular order, by the way. So let's start with number 1, micromanaging the player's pace. Downtime, as it's often described. So there is a big idea out there right now that after every single combat encounter or every sort of point of intensity, it is the job of the developer to give the player a break by introducing downtime into their game design. So you'll see this across action games, FPS, all the time. You have this big combat encounter, and then the next section after that, you're walking through a hall, or you're pushing blocks, or you're just standing around waiting for things to happen. Stellar Blade has an actual elevator that you just stand and look out the window for 2 minutes. These types of sections that are largely just filler. So let's begin with the first reason why downtime is a problem. The first reason is actually quite simple, which is that the player's pace is not going to line up with the developer's pace very often, especially when the players start to get more talented and experienced at the game than the developers themselves. Think of speedrunning, for example, where, yeah, if you're playing the game for the very first time, maybe the developer can kind of anticipate where you're going to get fatigued, where you're going to get tired, and they can put in a section where you climb a ladder or a section where you, stand around in an elevator, and they can say, oh, we're taking a break, we're having a little bit of quiet time now, or we can listen to the soundtrack and that type of thing. But what the developer is not going to be able to anticipate is more talented, skilled players who are just going to be blazing through the game with very little resistance or problem, and they want that pace. And so you're taking away the opportunity for your more experienced players to get the pace that they are looking for, and the pace that they have earned by becoming skilled at your game. You are catering to weaker players, which leads us directly to the second reason why downtime is a problem, which is that it is unnecessary. You don't even need it to begin with, because in modern game design, there's this button on your controller. It's called a pause button, and I don't see many games out there. There are a few, like Dark Souls and so forth, that are ballsy enough to take away the player's ability to pause the game. But until that happens, there's absolutely no reason for downtime, because at any point, at any time, if the player's actually feeling fatigued, they can literally press the pause button. And even with stuff like Dark Souls, let's be real, there's plenty of opportunities and areas in that game where you can just stand there in safety. If you're not advancing forward, nothing is happening, which actually ties into another point later on. But there's nothing really actually pushing you forward. Ironically, here's the really funny irony of this downtime concept. The only actual genre that can maybe make downtime a reasonable design choice is shmups or auto-scrollers, because the game is literally dictating the pace of the player. And in arcade games, you cannot pause. But with modern shmups, modern games, there's always that pause button. And the player almost always has to choose to push the game forward. At any point, in almost every action game, Bayonetta, Devil May Cry, name any of them, if the player just stops playing, and just leaves the controller, usually nothing happens outside of a combat encounter. And this downtime is in between combat encounters. So you could literally have a 15-minute hallway in Bayonetta or a 10-second hallway in Bayonetta, and it wouldn't matter in terms of giving the player a break. If the player decides not to press forward in that 10-second hallway, they're getting as much downtime as they want, which they can choose. But if you force them to run down this 15-minute hallway, they can't choose to skip it. So you are like making built-in loading times for your game for absolutely no benefit or reason, and the player can always pause, stop. There are so few games out there, if any, where you actually need a break from non-stop combat. That is such a rare occurrence in modern game design. I don't even see examples of this. Even Dark Souls, like I said, even though you can't pause, you can just go to the bonfire, or you can just stand still. And as long as you're not in the middle of a combat encounter, nothing's going to happen to you. So this forced, baked-in downtime stuff is just building in loading times, essentially, for basically no reason. And even if you really want the player to do things in between combat encounters, like mini-games or side quests, just make that optional, baby. Just make it so you can take a little turn and go into the safe room, like in Resident Evil 4, or go into the merchant shop and shoot at the firing gallery. Resident Evil 4, the real one, is actually a great example of this. It's a game with very little downtime, but it doesn't feel overwhelming, right? It feels like perfectly paced. One of the best paced campaigns of all time is Resident Evil 4, and there are very few sections of that game where you're just wandering around doing downtime. There are a few, I'm not a fan of those few sections, but for overall composition, look at games like Resident Evil 4 and Ninja Gaiden 2, and don't look at games where you have to sit in an elevator for 2 minutes. Which brings us to number 2 on the list, hard-coding the game's logic to technical restrictions or limitations. This is something that people tend to praise about retro game design, and it is neat to see how clever retro game developers were in the past when they had to hard-code certain aspects of their game design to the technical limitations of the hardware they're making it for. I think it makes sense of that era, but these days, it's pretty obvious it's not a good idea. So with modern shmups, for example, they used to actually use the slowdown of the hardware itself, Cave, to make the gameplay balanced. Like, they would actually depend on the hardware slowing down in order to balance the patterns and attacks of the game. The problem is that now forever, the game's hardware-based slowdown limitations are baked into the code and gameplay of these ports, so that now if you want to do a really good port of Ketsui, for example, or a really good port of a shmup of the past, you need to very accurately replicate the slowdown of that hardware. Or you look at something like Dark Souls, or Bloodborne, where their game's logic is actually hard-coded to that 30 FPS frame rate, so that for modern ports, modern ways to play these games on stronger, more powerful, capable hardware, that 30 FPS is still an issue because it's tied to the game logic, the game speed.
Buffalo Wild Wings now has all-you-can-eat boneless wings and fries? Yeah, they're going to regret that, because I'm going to eat them all.
Zillow Rentals. Zillions of apartments, one way home.
Has to maintain that 30 FPS, so you can either go in and do a proper remaster to uncouple that or to double it or whatever. But this design trend, I know where it comes from in the past, and this is a bit more of a retro game thing, but I think in the modern retro game sphere, whether it's shmups, beat-em-ups, fighting games, or action games generally, we need to get away from this idea of tying the game's logic to the frame rate, especially because the 60 FPS standard is starting to go away. We will see it go away here in the next few years, where everyone is going to be playing on 120 FPS monitors or higher very soon. This is going to make modern fighting games feel very dated technology-wise here really soon, especially in a genre that's all about reflex and fast reaction speed. Just imagine how much better Tekken 9 is going to feel when it's playing at 120 FPS, or maybe if there's online, you drop it down to 90 and then do some cool rollback stuff with higher frame rates. That could be a very interesting direction for fighting games to go in the future. High frame rates plus rollback netcode, that could be an amazing combination. But if we continue to program the games to be stuck, locked in at 60 FPS or lower, it's going to feel like these genres are stuck in the past. And I don't want to see that. I know it's tradition, and it's going to be tricky to start to build fighting games and shmups and action games at higher frame rates or flexible frame rates, but in the long run, it's going to future-proof the design of the game. The third short-term game design trend I want to see change is data-driven game balance. This is really big in fighting games now. I'm sure it's really big in any competitive game now at the moment, which is basically that instead of allowing the natural meta of competitive games to flourish or change and shift over time amongst the competitive player base, instead developers these days get really antsy and go in and shift the balance of their games on a very regular basis based on the available data they have. The problem with that is that all the data they are working with is short-term data, and there are certain aspects of a game's design and natural competitive growth that will not be available to you in short-term data. You can have all the technology in the world. You can have AI algorithms and data collection, and you can process thousands and millions of matches, but there's a lot of data that will not appear to you at the beginning. It can only slowly develop over time, especially with competitive games with their own competitive meta, because there is a natural balance that occurs outside of a game. A great example of this is in Super Smash Bros. Melee. You've heard it a million times. Fox McCloud, he's a broken, busted character, the best character in the game by a country mile. Fox dominates the meta, Fox invalidates, you hear this the entire time. And yet, as a competitive Fox player, playing at locals for many years, I was one of the few Fox players who could get through a bracket, because it turns out, because Fox is known to be such a powerful, dominant character, when played correctly, everyone everywhere and their mama knows how to do zero-to-death combos on your character. So in actual tournaments at a mid to lower level, Fox is like one of the worst characters you could play because everyone knows how to instantly kill you. Whereas if you play a more unique, lower tier character like Samus, that can actually take you much further in bracket as a beginner to mid-level player, because most people, how do you play this character? What's its weaknesses? Same thing with even Marth for a very long time. And so even though on paper you look at Fox and say, oh, this character is just out of control, there is a natural meta and balance that happens in fighting games and competitive games that people adapt to what they see most commonly. And then it creates a beautiful, interesting metagame in the long run. For a long time, 20XX, it was predicted that it would be a Fox-dominated future, that Melee eventually would be completely overrun by Fox players. But that is not how it's panned out, and these days, there's a much healthier view of the balance of Super Smash Bros. Melee, where, yes, Fox McCloud is extremely good, but when you plug in your controller and pick Fox, at least, I don't know, it's been a while since I've been to a tournament, people don't instantly roll their eyes at you anymore like you're playing Shin Akuma or something, and understand that there is a legitimate disadvantage to playing a character everyone practices against, everyone knows how to combo, everyone knows how to kill. And you'll see this across multiple competitive games in the long run. Third Strike, Street Fighter II, Brood War. There are a lot of long-term competitive games that the meta is actually extremely healthy, despite there not being balance patches and shifts constantly. Number 4 on the list is a big one, novelty-driven design. This is a huge problem in game design right now, in my opinion, because you hear from modern developers all the time how vital, how important, how all-consuming the first playthrough of a game is. They are obsessed with the concept of the first playthrough because, in the words of a lot of developers, the first playthrough is the most important because you don't get subsequent playthroughs if you don't have them sit through the first. That sort of makes sense in a very limited range if you don't consider your game worthy or deep over time. The whole problem with this concept, though, is if you're making your game deep and building it to last over time, the first playthrough cannot encompass the entire design of the game. You cannot get all of what is good about Devil May Cry 3 in the first playthrough. You can't S-rank the entire game on Dante Must Die in the first playthrough. You actually need to play for quite a long time. I'm working on this right now. You need to play for quite a long time and study the game in depth to get to that core media aspect of the game. But if you are terrified of players dropping the game over any resistance during the first playthrough, then you are intentionally making your game more shallow. We see this all the time. So instead of having these crazy requirements to get S ranks and having these really difficult enemy spawns and high damage and all that kind of stuff, if you want the player to experience the S rank the first time through, what do? You drop the difficulty, obviously. You drop the requirements, or you make it more slow-paced and accessible. And you see this in modern action games all the time. It's interesting and sad that the only time most modern action games finally start to heat up and be like, oh, this is a real game, is like literally the end. At the very home stretch, where the developers finally feel confident enough to say, well, you've sat through 6 hours, so you're going to finish it. So now let's have the game turn into the real game now because you've come this far. But up until that point, modern developers are terrified to punish or push the player until the very end. God knows they're not going to do it in the first 2 hours. With that 2-hour Steam refund, you know developers look at that 2-hour Steam refund as like a first date, terrified to make any wrong move, and so they are focused instead on what can we do for the first few hours of the game that's just familiar and kind of breezy and fun so you don't leave. Please don't leave, because if we don't get through the first playthrough, we won't get to the end. It is funny how much this parallels with like on a first date. It's like, well, if you don't get through the first date, you won't get to the end. But if you're just pretending to be someone else during the first date, what are you really accomplishing? Same thing with game design. If you are too afraid to show the player teeth during the first hour or two of the game, then I, as someone looking for challenge or difficulty, why should I even bother? And this is something that's really frustrating about reviewing modern games these days, because I get 3 hours in, I do not have a strong impression of the game, but I know, okay, because all modern games now are little babies and they're terrified to show their real selves till the end, I'm going to have to sit through God knows how much downtime and all this other distracting, easy-breezy garbage before we finally get to the real game. And this happened in Bayonetta 3. Bayonetta 3, I was sitting there like, okay, when does the game actually start? And it took hours to finally get to that point, even if it ever quite happened. And so this whole obsession with the first playthrough, yeah, maybe it will give you kind reviews, and maybe you will get less Steam refunds and all these types of things. But the price you are paying that no one else ever talks about is longevity. Is over time your game will feel more lame and disposable because you're getting less of the real game for starts. And then two, you got all this filler garbage that I'm not going to sit and replay through. I don't have the time for that. A lot of players don't have the time for that, especially when you're putting yourself up against classics that are instantly fun and enjoyable. And I think there is a big reason outside of nostalgia why so many people constantly return to retro games. There is a reason. That reason is because they put themselves forward right away. Number 5 is mandatory server connections and external accounts. I remember criticizing this when Street Fighter 6 came out, where you had to make that Capcom account and you had to actually exit the game and make the account on your phone or computer. I said, no, Capcom, no. You don't get to make your players create these external accounts and give them your email and all this kind of crap. No, you can't do that. External accounts are not cool. And I remember when I criticized that when Street Fighter 6 came out, there was a lot of defense of, well, they've got to do this because without these external accounts, it's impossible to do cross-platform netplay. We We all like cross-platform netplay, right? Well, take a looky at Tekken 8. In Tekken 8, yes, you make your little account in the game, but I didn't have to sign up for a Namco account. I didn't have to give them my email address and all this garbage. Tekken 8 did it right. Yes, you can actually have cross-platform play and all these cool little features internally built into the game. That is completely possible. There is never a valid reason, in my opinion, why you should be required to do external accounts and all that kind of stuff. I don't know, maybe in the world of MMOs or something, but in the types of games that I play, especially action games, fighting games, arcade games, you need to keep everything internalized into the game. And on top of that, when you fire up a new fighting game that has servers or cross-platform play and stuff like that, don't begin the game by connecting to the server Guilty Gear Strive. That is awful and a waste of time and completely unnecessary. What it should be is that the player should always be choosing these within the game. So I boot up Guilty Gear, I boot up the new fighting game, and I just want to go right into practice mode. I want to do some local play stuff, play against my friend. We shouldn't sit there and be forced to watch it connect to a server. Connecting to the server, going into the online play, that should be opted into. That should be chosen by the player where, I want to play some online matches. You open up the game, go to the main menu, you go into the online matches, and then when you go into the online lobby, then the game connects to the server. Do not do it up front when the game boots. Do not make me sign up for external accounts. Honestly, this is the most obvious one on the list, but I've seen so many people defend it for reasons I don't understand that it's going on my list. It drives me insane. Number 6 is an interesting one because there is a good idea there, but modern game developers don't know how to execute this good idea. So the good idea in concept is the idea of adaptive difficulty. The fact that the game will shift in how difficult it is based upon the player's performance. This is a very strong, powerful game design concept that I advocate for all the time on the channel in the form of rank. Arcade games figured out this design concept, and it is a powerful design concept that modern games are starting to play with. Unfortunately, the way modern games are doing adaptive difficulty is giving it a bad reputation because they are doing it wrong, in my opinion. And what they are doing is externalizing the adaptive difficulty to the player's whims and will. So you'll be playing some modern game now, and the boss is too hard, or the level is too hard, or the section is too hard, and you go, you know what, I don't want to deal with this. I go to start, I go to options, and I switch it to easy mode, and I play this difficult section on easy mode, and then I put it back to normal or hard mode, right? So the player is opening up an external menu and just flipping switches to the whims of where they want the game to be difficult or not. That is, no, don't do that. That is subverting and manipulating the intended difficulty curve of the game through external factors and whims. What you want to do is have the adaptive difficulty be integrated into the gameplay itself. I'm going to have to refer to a shmup on this one because shmups have been doing this a lot better than other genres. Battle Garega famously has this adaptive rank system. But if you want to drop the rank of the game, you can't just flip open a menu in Battle Garega and be like, you know what, I want 0 rank right now against Blackheart. That sounds good, right? Let's put it 0 rank on Blackheart. No, you have to manipulate the adaptive difficulty of the game by choices and consequences in the game design itself. You have to do things and sacrifice things to shift how the game is performing difficulty-wise. This is the correct way to do it because it formally makes adaptive difficulty an aspect of the game's design. It makes it something the player needs to be conscious of and needs to be addressing inside the game itself, not in some menu that they just flip on and off. It is happening in the game, and you tailor your choices around this concept. This creates meaningful differences in the new player's experience and the veteran player's experience, where the veteran player is going to come in and do all kinds of stuff in the early game to build up that rank with certain payoffs and benefits, and the newer player who doesn't want to be obliterated by high difficulty is going to make different, more safe choices, and then the mid-range player is going to be somewhere in between the two. That is really good adaptive difficulty design. It is built into the functions and metagame of the game itself, and it is not just a switch you flip in a menu. Number 7, the over-reliance on meters for balance and character distinction. Remember back to when games, especially action games, didn't have meters? Imagine a modern fighting game coming out now, or a modern action game coming out now, and it doesn't have a meter. The concept is mind-blowing. The concept is like illegal. It cannot be done. Every action game, fighting game now, has to have meters because it is the new way modern developers know how to balance games and how to make their characters distinct. Like, we'll put a bunch of characters in and we'll give them supers, and their supers is what makes the character distinct. But if you go back and think about a game like Street Fighter 2, the new Challengers, the version of Street Fighter 2, before Super Turbo and before Supers and Meter, remembering back to that era of Street Fighter 2 and that era of fighting games, the characters are still extremely distinct from one another. You look at T-Hawk, Chun-Li, Cammy, Dalsum, E. Honda, M. Bison, Vega, all these different characters, even without meter, are extremely distinct from each other and have their own matchups and balance and all their own characteristics that do not rely on meter or supers or specials to make them distinct from one another. It really comes down to a lot of modern fighting games now need stuff like meters and supers to make their characters distinctive, even from their earlier versions from previous games. You take away changes from the meter-based moves, and a lot of it blends together. And it makes a lot of fighting games feel very similar to one another, and it usually is the go-to method these days for developers to balance unique or interesting moves. They often don't know how to make certain moves fit into the meta of the gameplay naturally, or in a way that's based off of the frame data and just internal properties of the hitboxes and startup and all that kind of thing. They're not quite sure how to balance that, so they say, yeah, let's just throw a meter on top of it, and then going back to the data-driven balance, they just watch the move in the data of the game that's presented to them and say, oh, well, the move is a little bit more powerful than we expected, so we'll just make it cost more meter. Or maybe the move isn't as good as we expected, so we'll make the move cost less meter. Akuma from Tekken 7 comes to mind here, where they're not going to fundamentally change how the move or character works. Instead, they can just tweak the values of the meter, and it works functionally, kind of, but I don't think it holds up as well as more fundamental, archetypal type of character balance. Street Fighter 2. There is a reason why almost every character of Street Fighter 2 turned into a fighting game archetype across multiple series in multiple other games, because they had to balance these characters before Super Turbo based off of how they work fundamentally. This is how you get a grappler or a charge character. Capcom had to figure out, okay, this guy's grab and throws are just way too powerful. How do we balance that? But we can't use a meter. Well, okay, so we have to sort of make him slow and make him vulnerable to these other characteristics so that his grappling is now the forefront of how the character functions. Same thing with charge characters. They're sitting and thinking, okay, it turns out that slow-moving projectiles is really good in fighting games because you can create all these nasty setups with this hitbox just floating in the middle of the screen. So how do we balance this exactly? And they couldn't use the meter, so they had to put this sort of charging timer type of maneuver on the input. So this is the kind of creative decision-making that happened when you couldn't just slap a meter on it. These days, if you have some kind of fireball that's too good, or a grab that's too good, or some kind of move that's too good, the developer just says, oh, just throw a meter on there and call it good. Like I said before, I think it is actually creatively very stifling a meter should be the last resort to balancing a move, in my opinion. You should try everything else you can before you just jump right to meter, especially when you get modern action games now where it's like a meter on a meter on a meter on a meter. It's just, yeah. It is not totally functioning in an elegant, intuitive fashion like something like Street Fighter 2. Number 8 on the list, I've seen criticized here and there, but something I think should be talked about more, which is the fan fictionization of game design for legacy series, where with a lot of long-running legacy series these days, and pretty much all mainstream game series these days are legacy because it's difficult to launch a new IP these days. So most bigger franchises, think about fighting games, Tekken, Street Fighter, Guilty Gear, all very long series that have a big history to get to where they are today. And I think for a lot of developers of these big long-running series, they're kind of running low on ideas. What should we do? Where should we go? What's the next chapter for these game series? And a lot of the time, what they do is they kind of run out of ideas and turn to the fan base. Well, what do you guys think? And the way it works with fan bases is that the fan base is going to be more aware of the past and history of a franchise and obviously cannot direct the future of a franchise the same way a creative team can or a creative visionary. Instead, what the fans are always going to do is go back to the well of what has already been done. Even if you have like a really creative fan out there and they message, Naruto or something and have this crazy cool idea for a new character or a new concept, are the devs going to take that seriously? No, they're not. What they're going to take much more seriously is the sort of lowest common denominator agreement among the fan base of, well, we really like Tifa from Final Fantasy VII, so why don't you put Tifa in Tekken 8? Wouldn't that be cool? Or why don't you put Aerith or whatever legacy character, Goku, the fans can think of? And there is something kind of fun about this in its own sort of Mugen way, but it feels ultimately, to me, creatively very stale, because how do we get new and engaging characters or game design concepts if we're constantly just rehashing what has been done before? I am quite sure that I heard that Capcom is going to be remaking the Resident Evil 1 remake. We have finally achieved remaking a remake. And of course fans will be thrilled about this. Fans have no sort of creative standards on these sorts of things. If you ask them, fans are perfectly fine seeing the same thing repeated over and over because there's that fun novelty factor. But in the end, even the fans will lose interest on some level. Even if they don't know they're losing interest, it's just one day they wake up and they say, you know what? I'm not going to buy the Resident Evil 2 remake, because I already bought that game 3 times, or I'm not going to buy the Resident Evil 6 remake because I've already bought the other 4 remakes. I'm just kind of bored of it. It's the type of interest that's there until it's not. So developers, stop listening to fans, basically. So number 9 on the list is a very bold one because it's a more unique concept that I've been thinking of. It's kind of an original idea of mine, but I think it will connect with a lot of people, which is that a lot of modern games now and games coming out now do not have entropy. They do not have consequence for the player being idle or not doing anything. Entropy is the concept. So future games, I think, will start to integrate forms of entropy. I talked about this in my classic game design video, where one major thing that classic games had that modern games don't have are timers, are things that make you progress forward in the game. And I've been thinking about this concept a lot, and I still really love the concept of introducing timers back into game design. But I think the general concept could be expanded out into this idea of entropy, where there needs to be consequence for an action. Something needs to be happening at all times, even if the player isn't doing anything. And I have an example that I think modern gamers will find interesting, even if they don't agree with it, which is the difference between like modern Zelda and something like Majora's Mask. Majora's Mask is a very popular Zelda title. It's like the hipster Zelda title. And what I think is interesting and unique about Majora's Mask that people that are fans of that game connect with is this concept of entropy, where you have to be doing something. You have to be moving forward in that game because of the whole timer cycle pushing you forward. Majora's Mask, every second counts because every second is being counted down. And yes, it's not super evil because you can reset it and all that kind of stuff. But then when you reset it, you gotta redo stuff. So there still is a consequence. And another example is Pikmin 1 versus the rest of the Pikmin series. Pikmin 1, by far, is my favorite title, and I think the best title in the series because it has these timer entropy effects, where not only do you need to get stuff done during the day cycle of the map, but then you have this macro timer of you've got 30 days left, so you got to get everything done within these 30 days. And it creates a real sense of momentum and accomplishment and pressure that modern gamers right now are uncomfortable with because everything in modern game design, because of the whole open world exploration aspects of modern game design, has shied away from. Super Mario Wonder, for example, finally got rid of the timer from the Mario series, and not a lot of people really commented on this or cared about it because the timer of the Mario series is really generous. But I think modern games need this sense of entropy because it creates meaning, it creates stakes. Right now, that isn't happening. This is not a trend that is emerging right now in game design, but I do think it will reemerge in the future. I do think game developers are going to pick up on this concept of, hey, we talk about how every move you make in a game matters, except if you just set the controller down, and then nothing matters. Isn't that kind of a dumb concept? Even from their whole immersive viewpoint, it isn't very immersive if you can break the entire logic of the game by simply setting down the controller. And that ties back to my first point of micromanaging the player's pace, where even if you want to micromanage the player's pace, you have to do something about them not doing anything. And then finally, we have number 10 on the list, if you can't guess what it is from the thumbnail, which is progression for progression's sake. And yes, I am skeptical of how progression is used in video games these days a lot, because I think it is a commonly abused concept in modern game design. But even in terms of progression and accepting it as, okay, this can kind of work in certain genres and in certain game design concepts, the big thing I have a real problem with that we see abused all the time, constantly, is progression for progression's sake. Basically, it's just this unwritten rule that if you want your game to be a serious game and a deep game, there needs to be progression elements in it. Even if those progression elements are useless, pointless, and a waste of time, they still need to exist because that shows that the player is getting ownership over the game, or it's immersive, or blah, 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 blah. Progression for progression's sake is a big one for me because not only is it something that every game just does these days because it feels it has to, but also because if you're one of the few bold developers who decides, no, I'm not going to do progression for progression's sake, I'm going to give you the game and its true identity right up front. A recent example that comes to mind is the 2D beat-em-up Slave Zero X, where Slave Zero X decided, no, we're not going to do this move unlocking meta progression garbage that most other action games do. Instead, you're going to have all your moves right at the beginning of the game, which I thought was very cool and refreshing, and I saw it being widely critiqued among pretty much all the other reviews. Every other reviewer felt, well, it's just, this is how it's done. You just have to play the game to unlock all the moves because the player's going to be overwhelmed by the amount of options. But the thing that a lot of these critics and game designers don't seem to understand is the concept of legacy skill. You'll see this in character action games, even from the PS2 era, even character action games that I really love, like Devil May Cry 3 and Ninja Gaiden 2. You boot those games up for the first time, Devil May Cry 3, Dante Must Die ain't there. You need to unlock Dante Must Die. And even if you've played the game 100 times before, you got to play through it on all these other modes to finally get to your Dante Must Die. Same thing with Ninja Gaiden 2, Master Ninja. You need to go through the entire campaign like 3 times to finally get Master Ninja unlocked. But what if I already know how to play Ninja Gaiden 2 and I want to play it on my Xbox One X in enhanced mode? Now I have to play through the game over and over again for basically no reason. But I think single-player games need to be more aware of this because we need to go back to the essential question of what is the purpose of a progression system in terms of game design? What should a progression system accomplish? In my opinion, what a progression system should accomplish is making every playthrough of the game meaningfully different from one another based off the decisions of the players. So let's look at two basically different examples of progression systems, which are Devil May Cry 3 versus Pokemon Red. And I tried to use very universal, simple examples. So Pokemon Red is that classic RPG progression system where as you go through the game, you level up your Pokemon, and as your Pokemon level up, you have to choose their moves. And the thing about what makes Pokemon's progression system good is that there are limitations to it, and there are meaningful, different branching paths that happen every single playthrough. So if you're going through and you're leveling up your Charmander or whatever Pokemon it is, you have to choose what moves it learns and what moves it uses that replace other moves. That limitation of only having 4 moves available for your Pokemon at any given time makes every playthrough a different branching path. Where every playthrough you're giving your Pokemon different sets of attacks at different times, and each time you change what Pokemon you use and what attacks that Pokemon use and where you grind, where you level up, that shifts the dynamic of the playthrough, and you are meant to play through the game every single time, beginning with no Pokemon and selecting your starter. And so Pokemon Red, in my opinion, is an example of a simple but well-done progression system in a game. In Devil May Cry 3, however, as much as I love the game, the progression system is a hot mess because it does not function in the same way of making every playthrough meaningfully different from one another. And I know what you're thinking. Well, actually no, because when you start the game, you collect red orbs, and then you use the red orbs to buy moves, and so you're actually buying moves and choosing which moves to buy and all that kind of thing. But the problem is that the normal mode of Devil May Cry 3 is not the true game. If I reviewed Devil May Cry 3 and only played normal mode and critiqued the game based off of only my experience in normal mode, every Devil May Cry fan in the universe would reject my review, and rightly so. And they would all say, well, no. The real version of Devil May Cry 3 is playing for S ranks on Dante Must Die. And I agree. The real version of Devil May Cry 3 is playing for S ranks on Dante Must Die. That is the game at its peak. That is what the game is supposed to be. But the progression system has no bearing on this experience. It only gets in the way of this experience because if you get to Dante Must Die, you've already completed the progression system. It's already done. It no longer matters in any sort of way. The progression system of Devil May Cry 3 is just a hurdle you jump over to get to the true game. There is no meaningful decision making that impacts how the game plays in the long run. It's just purely homework. The progression system of Devil May Cry 3 need not exist. And in fact, a really funny subversion of this is in Devil May Cry 4. Recently, Capcom put out this like DLC type of thing you can buy that just unlocks the entire game. You can just go in and buy Devil May Cry 4's true game, essentially, and save you all the busy work of unlocking Dante Must Die and unlocking the characters and all that. And funnily enough, I don't think this should be sold. I think it's grimy to sell this function to the player, but I do think this should be an essential function if the game has a fake progression system. And once upon a time, developers, in their own way, sort of recognized this by including cheat codes to get around their fake progression systems, and I think that needs to come back. And so even if modern developers aren't willing to just upfront give you everything unlocked, which I think they should, but even if they're kind of weary about that and they want to kind of push the players through the fake progression system, they should have in there somewhere some function that the legacy players can activate to get around it, whether it's just going into the options menu and in advanced settings, there's like this thing you flip and it unlocks everything. Or if you have to literally put in the Konami code or whatever it would be, something, anything, to get around this progression for progression's sake, which is very different from a classic RPG where you are supposed to start at 0 every single time and then branch through the progression system as you progress through the game. And so these are my 10 short-term game design trends that I do not think will hold up in the future. And if you like this style of video, I have another one that I think you will enjoy, which is why games don't feel classic anymore. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, tell all your friends. I am going full-time very soon, like within weeks. So if you are so inclined, please, if you can, support the channel's Patreon. Keep an eye out. I'm going to be doing a merch t-shirt drive next week and then some fundraising streams. Just doing a lot within the next month to prepare myself for this switch into full-time because this is my true passion. I'm in it for the long haul. Thanks so much. Adios, everyone. So thank you to the $5 patrons, 100, Absconditis, Accepting Panda, Admiral Coconut, Admiral, AJA, Alexander Piper, Analgesic Productions, Anthony A, Arcade Hell, Arrow Viper, AU-Ally, Autoname, B-Lit, Bean Pit, Bo, Vito Dames, Boghog, Board Basmati, Borky22, Chase Columbo, Chris Yusufovich, Christopher R, Chronic Burnout 3, Claire Flip, Play Deeply, Tiny Coyote, Coast, Colorboy, Cosan666, Cooks and Soup, Desk Audio, Dances with Incels, Darren Griffin, Dave Benson, David Andrews, David Crespo, Delta Tango 6, Dino, DJ420, Praise It, Drano, Dr. Bosky, Elvin Sensa, Elias Alonso, Eric Houdini, FCK, F Deluxe, Priskin, Frames for Human, Francisco, Frecklelore, Full Set, Game Boy Guru, Beast Machine, GPM, Gustavo Sanchez, Farouk Khan, Hausu, Hirodet, Piki Hime, HUD, JDAF, Jake Ryan, Jack Walsh, Jacob Valenzuela, JLab, JVRPG, Jeffel, Jim Cons, John Kelly, John Longwalker, Josh Mayer, Jurgen, Kane, K2, Contain, Praise the Boys, Lord Harrington, Lorraine, Malaise, Martin Cynic, Mark Sloan, Mars Bar, Matt O'Leary, Maz, Minon, Meister, Mujam, Milo Chanel, Monroe, Nathaniel Davis, Neon Decker Games, Mila Agitis, Oakland Googles, Powell Pearl, Pedro Perez, Poorly Written Protagonist, Psycho Blizzard, Queen Charlene, Ralph Trujillo, Raul, Rapido, Real Scheme, Red Pulse Time, Retro Schmuffer, Rory Starks, Wolf015, Whiting Bartlett, Scanline City, Segfall, Zero Hardman, Spiders SPG, Spongy, Steady AI, Steve Fiction, Street Magic, Hello everyone, welcome to another Shmup Topic video. This one has been on my mind for years at this point and is my #1 pet. peeve when it comes to discussions or articles about the genre, which is this notion that shmups are a simple genre. You see this a lot across more bloviating reviews or reviews for a more mainstream audience where before they review the game, they're going to explain to you what a shmup even is in the first place. And I think that can be a noble goal. I find it a little bit tiresome. But if you're going to do that, at least do it accurately. That is my opinion. And I think my main problem with this whole notion that shmups are a simple genre is that I just do not think it is accurate. Yes, I think it's a little bit condescending at times, especially since I think there's a real bias towards non-arcade genres as being deep and complex and thought-provoking and have this big evolutionary history. And then those stupid arcade genres, they just got stuck on their dumb arcade hardware and they're just trying to steal your money. And there's no sort of evolution that really happened with those. And their evolution didn't work out because arcades are dead anyway, so it's all sort of antiquated and stupid. I think that's sometimes the underlying notion this tends to give off. But most importantly, I think this comes from a place of not really being in touch with the genre it is describing. So when you describe the genre of shmups as simple, I think a lot of people are coming from the reference of they played R-Type in 1980 whatever, and they sort of view the genre as R-Type and those types of games. And then when they look at the later shmups that have developed, stuff like Battle Gorega, Dodonpachi, Crimson Clover, Bullet Hell, Danmaku games, a lot of people, and I see this in the comments as well, sort of disregard this evolution of the genre as just this odd subgenre that seems to have taken over. And for some reason, shmups really got into this subgenre, and the more classical style is just abandoned for whatever purpose, right? But I think the story is a bit more complicated than that, and that is the purpose of today's video, is to try and dispel this idea that shmups are a simple genre. Because just mechanically speaking, I think this is way off track, and in fact, I'd argue that shmups are much more complicated than many neighboring genres that don't get this label. For example, platformers. No one really describes platformers as a simple genre, or it's less common that happens. But I'd argue of the two, shmups are, in most cases, more complex mechanically than a platformer. Super Mario Bros. And those types of games, Super Mario 3. But for whatever reason, because you can move left and right, I suppose, the platformer does not get this simple label. So why do people call the genre simple in the first place? The first point, I think, is because a lot of people just disregard the evolution of the genre over time. They're unaware of it. So if you're not really paying attention to 70% or so of the genre's history, then sure, I guess if you think shmups just remained in their 1980s form, then I guess you could call them simple, but that is not how the genre has developed over time, and that there are certain games like Battle Gorega, for example, that I don't know what planet you need to be on to describe that game as simple. It is far from it. The second reason I think people describe shmups as a simple genre is because they're not engaging with all of the game's systems to begin with. So if you play through the first 3 stages of the game, sort of bomb spam and credit spam your way through, then you fire up your review and call the game simple, you're not engaging with the scoring system, you're not engaging with the rank system, you're not engaging with the extend system, you're not really paying attention to how maybe shot limits are coming into play, you're not paying attention to the finer details of the gameplay, and you sort of just assume that all shmups work the same way under the hood. And I think this is a misconception that a lot of people tend to have, at least it seems when I look through the comments and stuff like that, is when people will say, oh, I don't like bullet hells, for example. Bullet hells are this and that, X and Y. It's like, well, you realize that most bullet hells, even though they have a similar design principle, have a lot of mechanical differences from one another, and that under the hood, it's not like all these games are put together in the same way. And I don't think people really pay attention to that, and I think that's another sort of reason why this notion of the genre being simple is because whenever you look at, for example, when I was learning to program Game Maker 2 and Game Maker 1, actually, you'd see a lot...
Okay, Coco.
think independence is extremely important, especially as someone who's an athlete. I'm not trying to be corny, but like it helps you because you know that you got yourself there, no one else did. I applied to YCCC, and you can use the first year to really just like think about what you want to do. My why is the sense of independence you get. It's really just that next step from high school that can just set you up so well for your future. So for me, it was a no-brainer.
Of how to game tutorials, how to create games tutorials, and a lot of them would include, okay, we're going to make a shmup today, boys. And so this is what like more mainstream people viewed as shmups. Okay, so we're going to have a ship, we're going to make it be able to move. A lot of them just moved them left and right, by the way. They didn't even do full 8-way movement, but okay, we're going to be able to move the ship left and right. Then we're going to create an object, and then we're going to press a button, and each time you press the button, it's going to fire a bullet. We have created a shmup, boys. You know, they're not talking about how auto-scrolling is working. They're not talking about, like, shot limits. They're not even doing full range movement. And, of course, the shmup they put together is the most European shmup of all time. And so I think that is another sort of contributing factor that people don't really know how to make a shmup properly. And so if you have this really simplistic 1980s asteroid sort of view of the genre, then sure, because the shmups are simple, but the genre has evolved a lot since that point. And then another reason I think shmups tend to be viewed as a simple genre is because of the auto-scroll and how deeply misunderstood the auto-scroll is. And if you hang around speedrunners, they always sort of turn their nose up at auto-scrolls and auto-scrollers, shmups auto-scroll, that's so stupid. And I think a lot of gamers sort of view the auto-scroll in this fashion. But in my opinion, I think the auto-scroll is a fantastic and design-shifting decision that really makes a huge impact. And there's been a lot of developments and advancements with the auto-scroll over all these years, but if you're not really paying attention to that and you think, well, if it auto-scrolls, that's just sort of how it is, all auto-scrollers are the same, you're not going to be mindful of the innovations and things people have been doing with auto-scroll over the years. For example, most people tend to think of auto-scrollers like those really shitty platformer auto-scroll stages like you get in Super Mario Bros. 3, where most of the time, if we're being honest, this is why speedrunners don't like it, you're just sort of sitting around waiting for things to happen. The game moves at this glacial pace, and it really just undermines most of the mechanics of the gameplay. You can't run, for example. You can't really do your full-on platforming skill set because the auto-scroll is just saying, no, stop, hold on. Well, that's just bad level design, in my opinion. Don't blame the poor auto-scroll. Whereas in shmups, over all other genres, the auto-scroll has been developed and thought about in a much more productive manner. So you look at modern bullet hells, for example. Well, what's with these bullet hells? Why do people like bullet hell so much? It's so stupid. Why don't people just continue to play R-Type and these type of classic shmups? The bullet hell, this is just for these hardcore weirdos that kept playing the genre. Well, one reason why bullet hells are so prominent now and such a strong aspect of shmup design, and why even modern shmups that aren't bullet hells, they still takes a lot of sort of inspiration from bullet hell design, is because one thing bullet hells have done is that they've really addressed this auto-scroll issue, where they've added in a lot of meaning into every moment of gameplay. And so you're never really sitting around in a proper shmup and a proper bullet hell. You're never sitting around waiting for that auto-scroll to move you to the next section, other than maybe a few calculated breaks. Instead, the way it works is that you are fighting tooth and nail for every second of freedom from the death that is the oncoming auto-scroll. So the game is throwing the kitchen sink at you and pressuring you to act. And every moment, every frame that you get advantage over the gameplay is a success. And one of my favorite insights about auto-scrolls is with speedrunning. Aquis mentioned this in a podcast episode we had a long time ago where we talked about the comparison between speedrunning and shmups. And he was saying that once you get into speedrunning certain platformers like Super Mario Bros. And Contra, and you just hold right the entire time, because you're speedrunning, right? You're just going to hold right the entire time. it essentially becomes an auto scroll at that point. And I think that's very true. And I think that's a much healthier way to view an auto scroll. It's like if your friend comes over and you're playing Super Mario Bros. And he's just holding right on the D-pad as you're trying to do everything else, but you have to move forward. And there's a lot more to talk about with auto scrolls, and I don't want to go on a full topic about auto scrolls in themselves. But in my opinion, the way auto scrolls are viewed by most reviewers is, I think, completely inaccurate in that they are blaming poor level design on issues with auto scrolls rather than the mechanic itself, which I think is brilliant. And I would love to see auto scrolls appear in more genres, to be honest, not just shmup. But it is a fundamental aspect of shmup gameplay, actually. And then my final reason why I find the description of shmups as simple annoying is because I do think there is a lot of arrogance among modern reviewers and modern game developers towards arcade genres. And if you think I'm just being a whiny baby about this, sure, but I also have proof. So if you go ahead and look at the recent interview with the Turtles Shredder's Revenge game that just came out, the developer got interviewed by the LA Times, and in the interview, he spends the entire time saying, you know, how these arcade genres are antiquated, their design is sort of outdated, we need to update their design with modern game design, and this is the way forward, and this is, you know, the best thing ever. And in my review of Turtles Shredder's Revenge, it is very clear that this was the idea that they added. So here's the things they decided to bring to the table. One, we're going to give inertia to dashes. That's brilliant modern design. Two, we're going to nerf the hit stun on attacks and throws and all your basic combat. We're going to nerf all that. We're going to focus on special moves, special maneuvers like your dumbass dodge roll. That's going to become like the key foundation. And the way we're going to give the enemies tons of super armor, and what we're going to do is we're going to turn a genre of arcade origin where the whole fundamental basis of the genre is basically a jousting of hitboxes between you and your enemies. We're going to take all that, remove all that, and instead we're going to turn it into a game of Simon Says. We're going to turn it into a game of press red light, green light, basically. So, oh, this is now dodge roll time. Let's dodge roll, and that's the only thing you can do. Oh, time to use your super attack. Also spam your super attack if you have to. Don't use your throw here. You know, we're going to very, very methodically make you do these little Simon Says scenarios. And in the feedback of that review, everyone in the comments was like, oh, Mark, you're so stupid. You don't understand. Don't you know that you just need to dodge roll their attack? Yes, I know you need to dodge roll the attack, but the design choice is limited and stupid. That's the whole point. It's lame and boring. And so I think there's a real arrogance to modern game design when it comes to shmups as well. And I think this is a lot of what underlies the Euro shmup. People look at the genre of shmups. They don't understand what is going on with 80% of the gameplay. Then they say, this could be improved. This is an issue. So we're going to add in all these special attacks and special mechanics, and we're going to fuse it with all these other sort of half-baked ideas. And this is going to bring shmups into the modern era, and that's going to make the genre complex and interesting. When really, I think a lot of these mistakes have already been figured out 2 decades ago, but you're redoing them because you're not being mindful of what has been achieved in the genre so far. This is why I think people need to cool it on calling shmups a simple genre, because there's just a lot of metrics where it doesn't make sense. Mechanically, are shmups simple? No. For the most part, absolutely not. They're no less mechanically deep than platformers, a lot of Metroidvanias, a lot of these types of games that people tend to view as more modern. Shmups aren't simpler in that regard. Are shmups simpler in terms of level design? Well, if you go off of really poor notions of what shmup level design is, where you just put blocks in there and you shoot the blocks, maybe, but that's not how proper, strong shmup level design works. And I would say shmup level design is actually a lot more intensive and complex than most platformer level design. So I wouldn't say they're simple in terms of level design. Then you could say, well, they're simple in terms of systems, right? Because RPGs, you've got all these stats and leveling and jobs and classes. And so with RPGs, they're so deep and complicated, right? Well, go ahead and do some scoring routes for Battle Garega. Do some chain routes for Dodonpachi. Learn all of the scoring mechanics for a Yagawa game, for example, or many other more contemporary shmups, and dare to call them simple. You need to sit. Yagawa feels like you need to sit and take a course and get a degree before you can even understand a lot of what's going on with the game systems. And so even in the terms of scoring, in terms of high-level gameplay, in terms of routing, listen to my interview with Moglar. He got the world record in Ketsui, and he's talking very in-depth about how stuff like empty locking is working and how he's really factoring together all these different ways to fully maximize the scoring system and the chip system of that game, and how the scoring system shifts between loops. So you go from one scoring system in loop 1 to a totally different scoring system in loop 2. It's just not simple by any metric, right? So I just don't see where you can really argue them as being simple. And then in terms of boss fights, for example, I'll show a little bit of a screenshot here. I'll scroll through and show you. So I put together, I wouldn't call it a basic boss fight by any means, but I would call it like a contemporary boss fight in my shmup. And that thing is like 1,000 or so lines of code, if not more. It's just so much that needs to go into the phases, the health, the movement, how the patterns are spawning, the sub-patterns, all that sort of stuff. Timers up your ass. It's just very complex. And I don't see platformers having in-depth, complicated boss fights. Even games that people tend to view as more modern, like, let's say, The Messenger. So The Messenger, the boss fights in that game are downright Simon Says. We've talked about the Simon Says game design. The Messenger's boss fights are not complex in the slightest, and yet no one sits and describes that game as simple, do they? Because it turns open world halfway through, so there, it's complex. As long as you have a big map and you have to run around on the map, it is no longer simple, right? That's sort of the idea. So that's all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed today's topic video, and please like, subscribe, tell all your friends, all that good stuff. Adios, everyone. So thank you to the $5 patrons, 100, Dingo, Another Joe, and me.
Our life is a collection of moments. Fishing is no different. Countless hours on the water, the tackle prep. The right color, the right hooks. Trophy hoist, the cast, the retrieve. Not this spot, what about the next spot? Hook set. Not all moments are created equal, but they all add up. They all lead to that one moment.
Focus on rewards points. It's all about luxury and feel.
If you want to find better credit card rewards, go listen to her.
Like and subscribe.
Or try Credit Karma for reward card options that make sense for you. Intuit Credit Karma. Everything you need to outsmart the system. Miss Hills.
Oh, God!
authority to do so, and that includes the original makers of the game who are working on the remake. I don't give a damn. For every new player that gets into the original Final Fantasy VII due to this remake, I bet there will be 10 more who just consume this updated version of the game and pollute the discourse with this revisionist history bullshit.
Nostalgia is one hell of a drug. Hello, everyone. In case you're wondering what is going on, I'm recording today's episode on my old 4-track recorder of my teenage years, and I thought, what topic wouldn't be more fitting to discuss than the power of nostalgia? And yes, the irony is not lost upon me, because whenever we discuss nostalgia, I think we are willing to acknowledge its presence. We're willing to acknowledge that it has some slight influence, maybe, on our shopping habits and on our perception of things. But in my opinion, I don't think it's very common that we really sit down and think just how powerful and pervasive nostalgia is across our media, especially films and video games. Almost everything that is being produced right now seems to be rooted in nostalgia, and even properties that you could argue as being newer IPs like Stranger Things, even something like that is deeply, deeply rooted in nostalgia and referencing things from the past and homaging this and homaging that. And why is that exactly? And that is more of the topic of today's video, because I really think we live in the nostalgia economy. And the first thing that I know people are going to say is, whoa, hold on, Mark. You're just saying that because you're an old man now. But in the past, nostalgia was a big thing too. In the 40s, people loved nostalgia. In the 20s, people loved nostalgia. It's just like a universal constant, like gravity. And what I would say to that is the first step to recovery is recognition. You seem to be in the denial stage still, because yes, in the past, I am sure there was some nostalgia involved in things, but the things that people were nostalgic for in the past are incredibly different than what we are nostalgic for in today's present. For example, maybe the child of the 40s, when they think about their past, when they talk about their past, what are they nostalgic for? They're nostalgic for their mother's blueberry pie. They're nostalgic for the furniture they sat on. Maybe they're nostalgic for the smell of their father's tobacco. All those types of things. What are we nostalgic for? Products. That is what we are nostalgic for. We are nostalgic for media and products in a way that is very different from the generations of the past. And I think it has a very interesting effect on our psyche. And that's something I think that wants to be acknowledged all too often, because to acknowledge it can get a little bit uncomfortable at times. So let's begin by talking about how nostalgia is often discussed right now, because I don't think it's any groundbreaking points to acknowledge it, but the way it is usually acknowledged is this. Let's have two contrasting examples. The first example is Disney Star Wars. Controversial reboot, sequel, franchise by the giant mouse, right? Whether you love it, whether you hate it, whether you think it's a bold new direction for a brand new audience or it ruined your childhood, whatever you think about Disney Star Wars, you can acknowledge that it is a controversial, nostalgic property that may have not delivered it for everyone, right? So that's the first example. The second example is the Capcom remake reboot series of Resident Evil. Now, on this side of things, almost across the board, critically, among fans, among people dedicated to the franchise since they were children, all the people you will talk to for the most part, maybe a few grouchy hipsters might say something, but
Chevy lets you begin every day fully charged, so you can go farther, and so can your money. Plus, stay connected with available OnStar technology. For summer adventures, Chevy's got you. Chevrolet, together let's drive.
In this video, I will explain the absolute best technique to get reviews for your Shopify store, and will tell you which app to use. So have you ever wondered how companies like Treatum get hundreds of Google reviews that directly show up when Googling for their brand? There is an easy way to get such reviews from your customers. The solution is called Google Review Widgets Plus. It's an app that asks your customers to rate the checkout experience or product right after they completed the checkout. You simply install it, add the widget on the thank you page, and it will ask every customer to leave a review. And the best of it is that they allow you to collect negative feedback in a private way without publishing it to Google. Also, once you have a few reviews collected, they offer a wide variety of widgets to showcase the reviews on your store. The benefits of collecting reviews on Google versus any other platform is that it's completely free of charge. There are no platform fees, and your reviews will be visible at first glance when someone Googles for your brand. Simply install Google Reviews Widgets Plus to your Shopify store today and start collecting reviews from your customers.
But for the most part, everyone is going to agree, oh, this is wonderful, this is amazing, this is exactly what I was looking for, and I'm looking forward to the next remake with high anticipation, right? So we are willing to sort of analyze it to that degree and ask the question, is it faithful to our childhood? But we're never quite able to bring ourselves to ask, why is this appealing to me in the first place? Does this actually make sense outside the context of nostalgia? That, I think, is a question many people tend not to want to think about. It's like, yeah, sure, Capcom reboots, yeah, sure, they're doing the best they can and everything, and it's great and all that, but why? Why are they doing it? Why are they taking a critically acclaimed, incredibly successful franchise of the past and just redoing it? Just doing it again. Yes, they're doing some new stuff, but they are not even hiding that they are redoing it. And not only are they not hiding that they're redoing it, but the fact that they're redoing it is incredibly exciting and is motivating people to buy the games and to get really hyped for the next release. Why is that so appealing? And that's something I don't think people quite ask all that often. And whenever this question is sort of brought up, there is one answer that I often hear, which is, well, it's all about making money. It's all about greedy capitalists and capitalism and whatever you want to call it, whatever, however you want to phrase it, right? It's all about profit margins, and this is an easy way, a guaranteed way to make money for these studios, right? It's a winner, so they're going to keep doing it, and that's the way it is. And sure, I definitely think that is true in many aspects. For example, the controversial Disney Star Wars. I wasn't feeling it after a while, and yet I was still showing up with my notepad and pen and watching them. Wasn't I? Weren't most of us doing that? Weren't they still incredibly financially successful despite the fan backlash? And yes, you get one side of the equation, which is, okay, you understand why the studios are doing what they're doing, why the developers are doing what they're doing, why Capcom is doing what they're doing, but you're still not answering, well, why are the fans showing up in the first place? Where
What the fuck was I gonna look at? Holy fuck, this game is long. I think I just discovered that this game is very long. Who actually knows? I don't. Yeah, I don't know what the fuck to do in this level, really. Do you have to kill every... You have to collect everything? I don't know, dude.
Is the demand coming from? You've noticed the supply. You made note of that. Okay, this is why there is supply, but you're not taking account of the demand. Why are people wanting this in the first place? Why does it even make sense that a movie that you watched 30 years ago, you're just dying to see a sequel for it, when there's an infinite pool of potential new franchises and new ideas, and franchises that actually are more contextual to what you're going through now, not what you're going through in the past. Why is it that we are so attracted to these properties in the past? And this is something that I don't quite ever hear answered. We'll explain why they exist, but we never quite explain, well, why are they being produced in the first place? Because let's say Disney Star Wars again. What if no one gave a shit about Star Wars? They liked it. It was a good old movie. It was fine. You know, it's Citizen Kane, basically. Citizen Kane's considered one of the greatest films of all time. Do you think if they brought Citizen Kane back now, all that many people would care? So I don't know if that's quite the hook, right? I don't think it's a matter of quality. I don't think it's a matter of familiarity, even. I think there's something much, much deeper, and we're getting to that in a minute here. But before we get into the heart of that question, there are some sideline observations on this topic that I have that I think are interesting when you sort of lay them out and think about them. For example, let's talk about the catch-22 or the option select of nostalgia properties. So nostalgia properties benefit from two explanations that contradict one another. Let's take Star Wars, for example. So, if you are in the mood to explain why Star Wars is amazing, we're talking about the original series now, and you're a big fan of the original series, you will say stuff like, well, it was groundbreaking. Nothing like it had been done before. It took audiences to places they weren't expecting. It was something new and revolutionary. And I'm not refuting or denying these claims. I'm just saying these are the claims you will often hear when people talk about Star Wars, right? They talk about why Star Wars is so important and why it is so wonderful. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Now we do the reboot franchise of Star Wars, and they're doing a lot of the same shit that they did in the original Star Wars. Maybe better, maybe worse. I'm going to say worse, but, you know, just for sake of argument, maybe some of you might feel it's better. In that case, if you say, well, this is all very derivative, this is all like basically the same thing over again, what's the value of this?
The defense of that, I often hear from my fellow millennials especially, is, well, nothing is new. Nothing is innovative. Everything is a copy of the past. There actually are no new ideas, and everything is just a reinterpretation of the past, and everything is an influence. There's nothing new. There's nothing revolutionary. It's all the same stuff anyway. So that criticism is invalid. That you can't even bring that criticism up because that applies to everything across all of time. A lot of people brought this up in my laundering video when I was talking about how everything is laundered these days. And one of the main defenses people said, well, back in the Greek times, they were coming from stuff in the caveman times, and back in Shakespeare times, he was referencing stuff from the Greek times. So it's all derivative. Nothing's new. This isn't even a valid point of argument. Okay, I get all that. But then how do those two explanations complement one another? How do you hold those two beliefs in your mind? How do you believe Star Wars, the original series, was fresh, revolutionary, meaningful, changed my life, changed the world? And then on the other hand, defend the reboot series by saying, well, nothing is meaningful, nothing is new, nothing needs to do anything that hasn't been done in the past because everything's already been done. So are you just arguing that Star Wars was the first brand new thing and that was it? It's like the ultimate piece of media and nothing can ever come close to it? And I often do think this is how millennials may subconsciously think about the properties of their childhood. Nothing can touch them. Nothing can be as great as they were into the future, so just accept what we have now. Honestly, I do think this is how millennials think, at least on some subconscious level. Nothing will ever touch the power of Star Wars, so why even hold anything to the same level of expectation? You're just looking to be let down. And that is the second catch-22 I wanted to bring up, which is the option select of the reboot. So here's really a good example, which is my criticisms of R-Type Final 2 and the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game. And basically any reboot franchise, this will come up. This option select is very powerful. And again, like the first one, it contradicts itself a little bit. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles come out. You can read this in the comment section. I'm not just being a jerk. In the comment section, people will say stuff like, this brings me back to my childhood. This is wonderful. I feel it. I'm reliving the things I wanted to relive as a kid. I'm really connecting with this. This is connecting with me in a way I haven't connected with the game in a very long time. I was really excited for this to come out, and it really connected with me, and the nostalgia hit is 10 out of 10. These types of comments are very common. And then the defense of my criticisms of the Turtles and R-Type, where I said, well, even on their own terms, I don't think they quite live up to what the original releases were, right? I think Turtles in Time is better. I think the other R-Type games are better. It doesn't follow the franchise in these ways, right? Well, a defense of that is, and this comes up, Devil May Cry reboot, another example where this comes up, people say, well, you got to take it on its own terms. It's a game, when you play the game on its own terms, then you can appreciate it. You need to put your nostalgia aside, sir. You're blinded by the past, my friend. You need to put that aside and just take the game as it is.
My uncle was a commercial fisherman, so grew up going fishing with him. And I found this apprenticeship program that seemed to have a lot of room for growth. You get to learn more. I applied for that. Landed at Furta Farms. The owners are great, laid back, but we get our work done.
You have someone make a 2,000-hour commitment to you, and you, in turn, make that commitment to train them. With Matt's help, I think we could double the size of the farm. I don't know if any other way that we could provide it without the apprentice program,
It's like, well, wait a minute here. Well, isn't that an interesting little win-win situation for the developer? So the developer has you buying the game so you can relive your childhood and so you can connect with it like you did in your childhood. But at the same time, the developer is also immune to any criticism against it not living up to the original pieces of that franchise because it's also its own property.
So how can these nostalgia properties ever fail? And this is a little option select that I'm sure many people who criticize nostalgia properties often run into that's very frustrating. It is simultaneously connecting people with their childhood or whatever, but at the same time, it has no responsibility to deliver on that front. It just has to exist, right? So these are sort of the underlying principles are subconsciously often being argued, which is one, things of today can never live up to the past, so don't even try and hold them to those expectations because you're bound to be disappointed. The second subconscious attitude is all a thing needs to do, for the most part, is exist. Baseline what we're looking for here. As long as it exists, it's a net positive. The alternative of it not existing would be the negative. And you think I'm being a pedantic asshole, perhaps? You have no idea how many comments across all of my videos that I get where people will say something along the lines of, so what? You just prefer this not to exist? Is that what you're saying? You're saying it would be better if this didn't exist. Like, well, that's a very interesting way to view it, where my criticisms, when it comes down to it, just shouldn't exist because that could prevent things from existing in the future. This came up in the R-Type Final 2 review a lot, where people were saying, Marky boy, you need to calm your ass down, because if you start criticizing R-Type Final 2, well, then there won't be an R-Type Final 3. Well, will there? And then, if there's not an R-Type Final 3, maybe there won't be an R-Type Final 4. And then the franchise and the genre will be dead. And it'll be people like you that killed it. I think there was even a developer, Platinum guy, Kamiya, who tweeted this. He's like, these goddamn cranky critics killed shmups, basically. So I don't think this is something I'm just pulling out of my ass here. I do think these are some underlying attitudes that I often run up against, and I think should be at least a little bit questioned. So now let's get into the fundamental question, right? So we've set the stage here. We've set that people are very tied to their nostalgia, but they don't quite want to acknowledge it. Now the question is, why? Why? And being the person that I am, I thought about this topic quite a bit. I have a bit of an answer here. Whether you think it's right or whether you think it's wrong, at least it's something interesting to consider. My theory on this is the reason why there is such a drive and such a demand for remakes, reboots, sequels to all these IPs from our childhood, all these IPs that we grew up loving and connecting with, is because, I'm just going to put it out there, I think it's because some part of us seeks closure to these properties, closure to our childhoods. We didn't quite measure up in real life. We didn't quite measure up to the promised land. So what we want to do is we want to bring these ideas into the present, and we want to close them ourselves. We want to put our own touch on them and be a part of them in a way that I just do not think generations of the past quite have. Now, what will happen with the Gen Zers, I have no idea what their relationship with media will look like. Millennial art is absolutely fascinating, and this is the world we live in. The millennial art is the world of the remakes, the reboots, the references. Millennials cannot quite create original stuff. We're not very original people, and that hurts millennials' feelings to say, but it is true. We are like one of the least original generations ever, but we think we are, but we're not, because our idea of originality is taking things that we like, we shove them in a blender, we hit blend, and then boop, out comes whatever we create, and that's original to us. And if you talk to millennials about this, which I have, we will say, well, I'll go that point before, everything's a reference, nothing original has been done. But the thing about it that I think is different is, so let's take the example of when a millennial makes a fighting game, for example, or Turtles in Time, or beat 'em up, a millennial is going to reference other games. We're going to, this is from Street Fighter, this is from King of Fighters, this is from this or that. But when Gen X's were making the original Street Fighter,
and they were making Ryu, and Ryu was throwing fireballs and doing uppercuts. What were those referencing exactly? Because they weren't referencing other games, now were they? Because they were the first game. So they didn't have a game to reference. They had to incorporate these elements from other aspects of life. And I think that is the key difference between millennial art and art of other generations before us. Other generations before it, what they had to do is they had to take influences from sources outside of the medium they worked in and then incorporate that and interpret that in their own unique ways. So Virtua Fighter, for example, Virtua Fighter is a 3D fighting game, the first 3D fighting game, which takes influences from real life martial arts. So in order to make this happen, what they had to do is they had to gain an understanding of real life martial arts and then interpolate that into the game. They had to gamify these concepts. In millennial art, we just take from Virtua Fighter. We just take from Tekken. We don't go back to the source material of, okay, we need to figure out how martial arts work. No. We just take from other video games. We just say, okay, Virtua Fighter did this. Copy and paste. And you can see it down to animations. Of course, people talked about this with Final Vendetta. But it's not just Final Vendetta, actually. Boghag was showing me in Turtles, April's walking animation in Turtles, that is Cammy's walk animation from Street Fighter Alpha. The uppercuts, those are from Street Fighter, right? So millennial art, you see this with our films too. It's not just video games. You see this with our films. Stranger Things. Stranger Things is an amalgamation of other genre pieces of the past. We're taking from The Breakfast Club. We're taking from this, that, and this, and Dungeons and Dragons, and all these elements, So we don't ever go to the source materials. We are just internally referencing references, right? We're making dubs of dubs of dubs. We're taking copies of copies of copies. So when I talk about art being derivative, this is what I am talking about, my fundamental theory on nostalgia. And I do think it is something that is at least worth thinking about when it comes to all these nostalgia properties and all these things coming out. Or when you're doing something yourself, you're creating music, you're creating art, you're making your game, maybe take a moment and think, rather than just copying things from other games and mixing them together in my own little collage, what if I took a step back and I thought about the fundamental basis of the art, why the art is the way it is in the first place, and try and get down to the roots of things a little bit more, rather than just being so excited to mimic and to copy. And so in the end, I think this is the economy of nostalgia and why I think it will continue probably throughout the rest of our lives. I don't think this is just a passing fad. I think the millennial generation will take this tendency to the grave. And this is I think this is the vice of the millennial generation, honestly. And I think we all share it. We can't help it. Our attachment to media is something that other generations just do not have in the same way, especially when it comes to video games. We grew up with them in a way that people from the 60s grew up with music and popular music and the Beatles and all that. It was a medium that we grew up alongside and that was targeted directly to us. And what I think is funny is that things continue to be targeted to the millennial. I don't know what that is exactly. Maybe we're just the biggest suckers, but as we get older, when they're rebooting Resident Evil, you think 10-year-olds are into that? You think 10-year-olds really care all that much about it? Maybe, maybe not. I think it's maybe a little bit more aimed at the millennial generation that connected with the games in the first place. Electric Underground, what I want to try and do is at least acknowledge the influence of nostalgia. I'm not saying it can't be there. I'm not saying that if it's a nostalgic reboot or whatever, I won't talk about it or review it. I'm just saying at least acknowledge the power of this and acknowledge all the complications that it can arise from, like the fact that we will both argue that a game is fulfilling our childhood and yet also argue that it has no responsibility to live up to the original IP, right? It can be its own thing and yet trade off of the IP of the past. I think that's pretty interesting. And I do think it's pretty interesting how millennials are so tied into expressing themselves through already existing franchises. That's sort of, millennials are a little bit more comfortable doing it that way. They're coming up with wholly original ideas and concepts and characters and all that sort of thing. So I thought this would be a fun little episode to do on tape, and I fully acknowledge it is deliciously ironic that I'm giving this speech from a nostalgic medium itself. So thanks so much. Adios, everyone. So thank you to the $5 patron.
My secret to good credit? Pay your bills on time for years and years and years.
You can listen to him.
No.
Or try credit building. It could be a lot faster. Intuit Credit Karma. Everything you need to outsmart the system.
Hello everyone, welcome to what I am sure is going to be a controversial and heated shmup topic video, but it is a subject that I think is very important to discuss, maybe the most important subject to discuss right now, which is the question of, are shmups a dead genre? And as you can tell by the title and thumbnail of this video, I believe that yes, by my criteria, shmups are currently a dead genre. However, when I say that, I don't say that to be pessimistic. I don't say that to try and dismiss the genre or make it into, oh, let's just quit and play Counter-Strike or something like that. I say that because I think it is very important to be objective with the situation at hand, in that if we're going to make any changes, if we're going to make any improvements, the first stage of
I'll use twin cannons.
Freaking good.
Come play at your local Pokemon League.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Electric Uncut. It's been a hot minute, but we have returned, and today I'm talking about my thoughts on the studio gaming cycle. That's my term for it. And my suggestion, and it really is a suggestion, I'm not trying to make this all dramatic or trying to make this into some kind of statement or that kind of thing, but just sort of share my thoughts on why I think mainstream studio gaming is becoming so unappealing to me, why I think it's bland and boring, and also to suggest an alternative, because when it comes to YouTube gaming, it's not hard to find criticism, it's not hard to find people pointing out what's wrong, of course, but I think it's less common to find people who have an alternative and to kind of provide that alternative, which I think I can definitely do in this video. And for those who follow my channel, you know that I'm really deep into shmups and arcade-based genres and, really skill-based genres, as I like to call them. And there's no denying that in the past few years, even a little bit before that too, there's been a huge transition where these genres are just being outright dropped by major studios, probably because of their overhead is just so crappy, and being picked up by the indie developing scene. And indies are doing an amazing job. I just recently played Fight Range. I'm going to do a review on that, and that's probably one of the best beat 'em ups I've ever played, point blank, even comparing it to, the great beat 'em ups of the past, Turtles in Time and all the beat 'em ups that I really love. Fight Rage might just outright be better than them. It's that good, and it's crazy when you think about how many quality games are out there that just do not get any sort of attention, and even people who review them, I feel like, aren't giving them enough respect or enough sort of credibility. I've read reviews for Fight Rage, and you'll see the scores are like decent scores, but then when you go through and sort of read the reviews, it's like, okay, you are not picking up on what this game is putting down. There's a lot of elements of this game that aren't really being capitalized on. And, shmups are like this as well. Maybe that's just a larger symptom of gaming journalism and what people want to read and that sort of thing. But anyway, I do want to, in this video, explain why I personally think that studio gaming is very overrated and why I think indie gaming is so underrated. And I think a lot of people who are in a similar sort of generation to myself, and I did look at the analytics, and basically all my viewers are my age or a little bit younger, a little bit older. We're all in about the same demographic though. So I think a lot of us are going to be much more interested as time progresses in the indie scene, because I think the indie scene is going to evolve and continue to evolve. And one day we'll start to seriously challenge studio gaming. Right now that seems a little bit ridiculous, but I do think that's on the horizon. I'll talk about that in a little bit here. But the first thing I want to do is explain what the studio gaming cycle is, because I kind of made this term up, but once I start explaining, I think it'll sound extremely familiar to you. So the studio gaming cycle is the cycle that both gamers and content makers around gaming fall into. We kind of fall into this together, and it kind of goes like this. Step one, a studio announces trailers for a new game or teasers of teasers, which is ridiculous. Like the new Virtual Fighter teaser of the teaser. It's like, okay. But, so step one, announce the teaser. Step two, so YouTubers cover that. That's your reaction videos. That's your, oh my gosh. That's your speculation, This part of the cycle, to me, is kind of like the most novel and kind of innocent, right? I mean, it makes sense. Natural curiosity, that kind of thing. Step two, okay, so now we got the hype. We got it out there. Step two is now to start making the pre-controversies, the early controversies. So pre-release controversies. So these come out, oh, they're going to censor this. Oh, they're changing this character. Oh, this or that. And then we all kind of generate content from the pre-controversy. And then now it's getting to the point where there's controversy, and then there's a controversy of the controversy. And I've actually once seen like a 3-layer controversy, where it was a controversy of the controversy, and then a controversy of the controversy of the controversy. Am I saying that enough? I'm getting lost here. I remember with Diablo Immortal on the phone, right? So there's the initial controversy of, okay, it's mobile only. People are getting pissed about that. And then there's the second layer where people were getting mad at the people getting mad. And then there was the third layer of the people getting mad that were mad at the people who were mad about it being on mobile. And drama, YouTube, CPM, let it rain, baby. And I actually think for content makers, it's pretty interesting to look. I think this is probably some of their most lucrative material. So even people who you think aren't necessarily part of the YouTube gaming culture, people like Jim Sterling, and I'm a fan of Jim Sterling, but he is actually in this cycle though, right? He's part of this kind of controversy cycle. I think he's pretty self-aware of that, you can tell, and I don't hold that against him or anything, but it's like, even if you are attacking the system, the way it's set up, you're still reinforcing it because you're creating content and material for it to reinforce itself. For example, let's say you were really mad about Last of Us 2. I didn't like Last of Us 1, oh no. So I didn't give a damn about Last of Us 2. These types of games, walking simulators and stuff like that, like movie games. I like to call them movie games, where they're like more movie than game, where they're kind of like a hybrid, where it's like mostly a movie with some game elements in it. I don't like those types of games anyway. Even if the story is good, I just have an ability to really enjoy them. And so I didn't care about Last of Us 2 at all. But I think it's interesting that even if you hated that game and you made like 18 videos about how it's, whatever, offending you to your core or whatever it is, in a way, you are not in a way, like you are actually helping that game a lot because you are creating weight, you're creating interest. The whole there's no such thing as bad press. For the most part, especially in the internet age, that is definitely true because even if you are getting all this controversy, people are shitting all over your game and attacking you or whatever. You're creating interest, buzz, and like in YouTube terms, right? You're creating what's it called, like feedback or whatever it is. Like you're creating weight to these releases, and they become landmark releases, whether they're controversial or not. They become more important and heightened, rather than if like with indie games, or not even straight up indie, like semi indie-ish, like smaller studio games, like Ketsu Destiny, probably one of the greatest games ever made of all time. Came out on PS4 a few years ago. One person covered it. It came and went. I would have preferred if Ketsui Destiny came out on PS4 and there was like all this internet rage about it and stuff like that, because then it would at least would have highlighted this game more. So that's what I'm trying to get across in this video too, is that even if you despise what's going on in mainstream gaming, like you hate loot boxes, you hate this and that, you hate all these different things going on, or crunch or whatever, the more you engage into this, the more you sort of feed into it, which makes sense if you make YouTube videos and stuff like that, but it does seem a bit counterintuitive. But I think the more healthy step is what I'm getting at, is if you truly, truly want to move on, if you truly want to step away from this, you truly want to wash your hands of these studios, right? You hate how they do crunch, you hate how they monetize, for me, I just hate their games, so it's really easy for me. It's very natural for me to step away from these games, and I'll talk about the gaming part of it. The best way is honestly just to step away completely. Just move that attention to where it should be focused, which is, well, for me, if you want to be mad and rant on the internet, that's fine. I have no problem with that. But I'm saying if that's your goal, is to advance quality gaming, I guess. If you're trying to advance quality gaming, then I think the indie scene is where there's no denying that's where it is, because that's where you're getting the most creative, the most innovative, and usually not even just in like smaller retro stuff, but even like mainstream stuff. A lot of the concepts that are becoming hits now, like your Fortnites and all that, where does that start? It started with PUBG. PUBG is not indie, but it's indie. You know what I mean? It's a smaller, it wasn't like some kind of Korean studio that made that. And then that Battle Royale gets co-opted into the larger studios. That's kind of the cycle you're seeing even in mainstream gaming, where these sort of smaller, sort of indie-ish type studios come up with the innovative idea. It catches on. The big studios look at it and go, okay, we're going to copy that. And that's the way it goes. And it's so even within the sort of like larger mainstream style of gaming, a lot of that is just being, I don't want to say plagiarized because that's too hard a term, but it's like creatively bankrupt, right? There's no innovation going on there. And so that's why I also think that naturally these games are going to, I think this system isn't going to hold out forever. This whole like massive, super expensive AAA style system where they can't afford to make their own games and they're just monetizing them and really corrupting the gameplay to prop up the monetization and all that. I don't think that can last forever. Who knows how long it can last? It could last decades, for all I know. But I think at one point, these smaller studios are just going to become strong enough and nimble enough and have low enough costs to start sniping those sales and sneaking them in, because it's going to become less, I personally think, it's going to become less and less distinguishable what's a AAA and what's like a higher quality indie title release. That's going to become less and less distinguishable as we move forward, because one, they're like scaling back a lot of those studios. Like, look at Pokemon. Pokemon is a perfect example of it. Pokemon Sword and Shield, I'm not a massive Pokemon fan, but I'm enough of a Pokemon fan enough to say that, yeah, that game's definitely a step back in terms of the gameplay. And really, the graphics are not that impressive. I could see a smaller studio coming in and making a pretty similar game as far as the quality of the graphics and the gameplay and all that sort of stuff. And of course, there's the brand stuff, but I'm saying at some point that brand recognition starts to wear down. Like, my children don't give a damn about Pokemon, right? So 10, 12 years from now, a new, like, not Flappy Bird because that's dated and gone, but, a new IP could come in and supplant those.
Are you interested in pursuing a career in the fast-growing HVAC industry? MEMA Technical Education Center is the school of choice for people who are serious about oil, heat, and gas heating, air conditioning, and refrigeration. We have the most advanced hands-on campus in Maine, with decades of industry experience. Learn about essential high-demand jobs in a growing trade. If you want to see what MTech has to offer, visit our website at mtecenter.com.
But anyway, I'm getting off into the weeds here. So let me come back to this studio gaming cycle bit here. So here on this channel, I've been thinking about sort of my role in the YouTubing ecosystem, especially as of late, because I am trying to help grow the channel a bit. And one thought that I didn't have, because I know I couldn't do it, but the kind of traditional advice, and I have heard this a lot, is, well, start covering more mainstream stuff. Like, start covering, I don't know what, Last of Us 2 or something like that, right? Like, start covering that sort of stuff and sort of adding your own spin to it, right? But the problem with doing that for me is I don't have a lot to add to these conversations because I don't like these games. And contrary to what my Psycho review may make you think, but yeah, there are times where I can kind of go on and criticize a game that I don't like, but it's because there's something within it that I do like. The Psycho ports are a good example. I love the games themselves, but I was very critical and had a lot to say about how those games were delivered to us. But if it was just an outright bad shmup, like let's say you made just an outright bad shmup that I didn't like, and you sent it to me, and you're like, hey, or it came out, because there are bad shmups that come out, and it came out, and I bought it and played it, and I didn't like it. I'm not one of those people who's going to make a 30-minute video where I snip apart your game and say, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks. For one, I just don't like to do that. I don't really like to be critical in that way. I like to try and be constructively critical. But also, it's just, I don't have much to say anyway. I can't really think of how to spin that because sometimes people fail, right? That's just, failure is part of life, and maybe they can learn from their bad shmup and move forward and make a better shmup. That's how we are. So I'm not going to be able to do that with these larger studio games anyway. Like, I couldn't sit down and make myself play Last of Us 2 for more than probably an hour before I'd be like, all right, this game's boring. And that would be my whole critique would be, I played this game for an hour, I was too bored, I couldn't continue, right? So that's why I think I can think about, okay, what is my role? And I'm thinking about, well, I need to start trying to create more of an alternative space that's not, if there are some mainstream-ish games that will pique my interest, because I actually do like them, but that list is thinning, and it continues to thin year by year. It's not expanding, so at one point, it could literally happen that I don't have any interest in mainstream gaming at all. Right now, there's studios that I do like, I do follow, but their releases are slim, and their releases are changing, right? Like Platinum, like Team Ninja. Team Ninja is my favorite. Team Ninja, Platinum. Nintendo's almost done for me. Like, Nintendo games, I have not been very interested. In fact, I was thinking about covering the Super Mario 3D All-Stars release, but then I was like, well, what do I really have to say about this? I really considered covering that a lot, because I did buy it, because, of course, alright, but it's the wrong ROM, and all this, like, I have these criticisms of it, and I was like, well, especially with Nintendo, I've learned my lesson, is basically, unless you're willing to die on that hill, just leave Nintendo alone as far as criticizing it and all that sort of thing. But what I'm getting at is I'm hoping, and I hope this can become more accessible to people, is creating an alternate space where we understand that, okay, the game of the year is not The Last of Us 2. The game of the year is going to be an indie game that is absolutely fantastic, that is much better than Last of Us 2, in my opinion, but it doesn't have that critical weight that people have. And that's one thing that I've always been frustrated with, and I've talked about on this channel a lot, is I hate how the genres I love are so dismissed by critics as far as their importance. There's just a huge bias against skill-based games.
What the fuck?
Don't move.
What the fuck just happened?
Isn't it scary being an FBI agent?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Electric Underground. That is absolutely fantastic. That is much.
How do you do this? Like what? Like, what are you actually supposed to do with these toad statues? The fuck? You're supposed to launch all of them at once? Is that how that works? I don't get it. I don't know. I guess it's a weird method.
Better than Last of Us 2, in my opinion, but it doesn't have that critical weight that people have. And that's one thing that I've always been frustrated with, and I've talked about on this channel a lot, is I hate how the genres I love are so dismissed by critics as far as their importance. There's just a huge bias against skill-based games. Shmups, fighting games, arcade beat-em-ups, rail shooters, all these types of games, character action games. They're the ones that are the closest to getting critical attention. But they're also a dying breed of themselves, right? How long has it been since we've had a Ninja Gaiden game? Like, where's Ninja Gaiden 4? God of War, right? God of War was never all that great to begin with, but even still, it's pretty solid. But now it's become like one of those walking story simulator docs. I don't know what these types of games. I don't know how to describe them, but they're not character action games anymore. Devil May Cry came out. That's a highlight. So I don't think it's as good as DMC4. Now that I've played it some more, I do not think it is as good as DMC4. But maybe I'll make a video about that. But all these types of games that I used to love, like stealth action games, even like a Metal Gear Solid and stuff, it's just all of them are really thinning out to the point where, it's just hard to know what to do. And like I was saying, the genres that I love do not get the critical attention that other genres get, right? You're not going to ever see a fighting game on Game of the Year, right? They're not going to do that, even if it's an amazing fighting game, right? It's not like Guilty Gear Xrd was like Game of the Year or anything like that. What tends to always get like these huge critical darlings, your The Last of Us 2s, your Breath of the Wilds, these types of things, are like action RPGs. That's like the critical hot spot, right? Everyone, The Witcher, what's the Cyberpunk? Is that like a first, with like some shooter elements too, people like that. Those types of games really get a lot of love and attention, right? Whereas, or even FPSs at times too, though that seems to be falling off a bit, but the arcade style genres, they're just not, even if the game is amazing, it's just not, the genres are not considered as important as other genres. And so I'm hoping that I want to kind of make this ethos a little bit more wide, what is it, public or mainstream if possible, of the things that I look for in games and what I consider a good game, what I consider a bad game, and like a lot of the sort of design philosophies within mainstream studio games for me just contradict what I'm looking for to the point where I consider them not very good from a gamer perspective, but that's just me and also what you're looking for in gaming, right? So basically, what I'm saying is I'd love to see a more alternative space where more and more people understand that there are gamers out there who want skill-based gaming. They don't want this story, interactive story gaming, right? Even RPGs, like if it's an RPG that has really interesting mechanics or really interesting gameplay or systems, like that's still a game, right? But like think of like the Final Fantasy VII releases. Like I thought it was a great sort of movie, right? I just watched it because I played it for a bit. I was like, that's all right, but I just think, yeah. Basically, let's get to the topic at hand here. The main difference between major studio games and indie games creatively that I want to kind of express in this video and explain why I think studio games for me are becoming less and less interesting, less and less compelling, and why indie games are much more intriguing and grab me much quicker, and I have so much more fun playing them and returning to them, is the lack of focus in the game design of major studio games, where they don't know on a fundamental level what they are. What are they trying to make you do? What is the underlying philosophy behind the gameplay of this game? They don't have a sense of true identity in a gameplay sense. Sure, they have identity in their story and in their graphics and in their branding, but in the gameplay department, they do not have identity. If you strip away those elements and you put them beside each other, which is which, it becomes very hard to distinguish. Or, even if you can tell the difference, the differences aren't meaningful, right? Whereas with shmups, you strip away the graphics, you strip away everything, you make it just blocks and squares and just abstract shapes. You could stick down a Futari and you could stick down a Garega, and you take away all those surface elements. The gameplay design is there. You can tell, oh, this is definitely Futari. Oh, this is definitely Garega. Even if their assets were completely identical, because the way the game is designed, the gameplay experience is so distinctive, even within the genre of a shmup. But with a lot of these, like, I don't know what to call them. They're like these movie-ish, character, action-ish, RPG, hybrid melting pot games, like your God of Wars, your Tomb Raiders, and all those sorts of things. Sure, they have little gameplay elements, but what is the fundamental gameplay goal of these games? Last of Us 2, what is the gameplay goal? What are you striving to do? I honestly can't, it's like, well, I get to kill stuff and, sneak around. There's no driving idea behind the gameplay. Whereas Fight and Rage, there's all these types. Basically, Fight and Rage is beat 'em up that I'm loving right now. The fundamental gameplay idea, even within the genre of beat 'em ups, is let's make a really technical beat 'em up game. Let's have a beat 'em up that's fast, that's furious, that moves at a much quicker pace than its peers, and is extremely technical to the point where if you master a lot of this game's systems, you could no miss, no hit out of almost any situation because of the pairing system, because the way you have your supers and all this sort of, and your movement is so strong and your jump is so strong. You can wall bounce, you can wall kick. There's a comprehensive game philosophy behind the game design there that just doesn't carry over to many mainstream games. And the ones that it does tend to be the better ones, right? Like the Hitman series. I'm a big fan of the Hitman series. They understood with Hitman, they created Blood Money, which is basically like the culmination of all the elements coming together. It's like, this is peak Hitman, right? And then they went ahead and like, well, what do we do next? And they experimented with like a Splinter Cell style Hitman. I think that was Absolution, I think it was called. Awful. It didn't work. Then when they returned for the reboot series, they sat down. You could tell they sat down and thought, okay, what makes Hitman Hitman? What makes this gameplay compelling? What makes this different from other stealth action or stealth games that is distinctly what people are looking for? And they figured it out. And I say Hitman, the remake, whatever, the reboot, just called Hitman or whatever, and its sequel, Hitman 2, fantastic games, right? And they are sort of triple A-ish, but they're also smaller studio, and they had all kinds of financial issues, and they're getting sold and passed and forth. And so I feel like with the way things are set up, the studios who try and do this are usually punished a bit, and the studios who, again, focus more on like the monetization elements and all that sort of stuff seem to be the ones that are thriving, which is sad. And like I was saying before, I think that's why at some point we're going to hit this sort of crossing point where the indies are going to keep stepping up their production. They're going to keep stepping up everything, their quality. Like the surface elements are going to keep getting better, especially as technology advances and tools become much more accessible. Like if I could get my hands on like some sort of 3D game making engine that's even not Unity, but like a little bit more like Game Maker, but with 3D elements and stuff like that. Yeah, I could see myself going to town with that, and I could see like there's going to be a point where people start to catch up, right? And also these releases from the major studios are just going to start tapering off, right? Like Capcom might not make another Devil May Cry game. Platinum may abandon the sort of character action games that they're known for and start moving more into like the Nier Automata RPG hybrid action games, right? Or like just start implementing their character action systems into Final Fantasies and stuff like that. So I do think there will come a point where studio games and indie games begin to blend together more commonly, and it does become more difficult to distinguish them. And indie games aren't treated the same way as like this sort of, baby brother to the big brother type thing, which is kind of the relationship we have now. And that's why in this channel, I'm really hoping to sort of promote this side of gaming more and to have people take it more seriously, and also have a bit more skepticism towards the mainstream studio gaming. Because personally, I think that I don't really trust a lot of the reviews that come out for these games. I think having done reviews for Nintendo Life and stuff, even for Shmup, you can tell there's sort of this ecosystem within reviewers of keeping it consistent with each other, and one that steps out of line ends up getting hammered because he makes everyone else look bad, or it ends up causing a lot of controversy. And then there's the studios that, if you're too critical of them, maybe they stop sending you release copies and stuff. But, it's all very dirty, all very self-reinforcing in my opinion. And so I think for me, my goal is to step away from that system and to make fun of it from afar, but to focus most of my energies onto the indie gaming scene, especially ones that are kind of pushing forward, right? Like there's an indie game coming out that's like a Star Fox type game. I would love to see, my dream is, I'd love to see indie studios like take over these sort of niche franchises or smaller franchises that the studios drop. Like, oh, we're not going to make Star Fox games anymore. I'd love for someone to come in and just take over that space, and take over and become like the definitive rail shooter series that everyone's like, yeah, Star Fox was good, but this rail shooter is just taking over. And because you can kind of see, that kind of happened with like 2D platformers, right? Like Nintendo was the 2D platformer kings, but that is not, I don't think that's the case anymore, right? Do you look to Nintendo for amazing 2D platformers now? Like, what was the best 2D platformer they made in a while? Mario Maker, which isn't actually like a focused game, right? It's like a Game Maker type tool, right? So yeah, I think that's just going to start happening more and more. Basically, where beat 'em ups too, I'm hoping, or character action games. I would love to see some indie game come and just take over and be like the next Devil May Cry and stuff like that. So anyway, thanks everyone for tuning in, and let me finish this video by thanking my patrons. So thank you to Dingo, Andy Cap, Anthony A, Ben Wynn, Corio, Eric H, Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Hausu, Kiwi, JB, RPG, Joe Angelo, Game Boy Guru, K, Malays, Mark Toms, Martin Worrell, Maz, Meher Kalendrian, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, Okla Kugels, Raul, Smacky Factor, Segumo, Plasma, and Utakaya. Thanks for watching.
Here's Owls, the online music shop ranked #1 in customer service by Newsweek. Our team of musicians make it easy to afford your dream gear now, so you don't have to save for months or years. Just
Hello, everyone. Well,
I don't know. How do you get more time on this? Can I use support? Let's check that out. Oh, support. I can think how we can do that faster. Just get to the top and then do the kick. God, fucking hate these snakes, dude. Huge hater. Oh wow, that's really annoying. Oh my. What do I do to get more time on this level? That's what I'm confused about here. So Sakura's Aid. Is that the only level available? Um. Are you fucking serious? Why can he reach me there? What the fuck? Huh. I don't know. What are you supposed to do on this level to get more time? That's what I'm confused about. I don't know what you're supposed to do here. It's very weird. Man, I wonder what you're supposed to do for this particular level, man. So how do you get time back? Oh, you have to kill the fucking snakes? Jeez, that's what you're supposed to do? Okay, then. done here. That's pretty bad.